Yeah, I've just noted that Councillor Guy's joined us at this point.
Morning, Lisa.
Chair, I just have a request, I guess, around this paper, because it feels like it's essentially 3 papers and we've got 2 quite chunky recommendations to consider, one on QAC and one on the whistleblower policy. I just wondered if it would be worth considering the discussion in 3 chunks, maybe A, B and C and then D and E, but leaving that with you. I just might make for a more coherent discussion and debate.
Yeah, so look, we can handle that within the one the noting, Nikki, but we can break that up for discussion.
Yeah, thank you.
So just to touch on what the recommendation is in the report, through you, Chair,
yes.
And then happy to respond to any questions. So the recommendation is, number 1, note the contents of this report. Most of the report is an update for information for the committee. As I touched on, I didn't touch on in the introduction, but we have a recommended proposed protective disclosures, protection of whistleblowers policy. We have an existing policy in place. This is a fairly significant revision to incorporate new requirements of legislation. So that is attached for you to consider. And the recommendation is that this committee recommends that for adoption to Council. And the expectation would be, if you are comfortable with that recommendation, Council will consider that next week. And then the third point is a recommendation to Council that approves the Queenstown Airport Corporation's proposed framework for capital reform. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Gareth. So I'll open it up now for questions and comments.
Okay, I'll stick my hand up through the chair. Look, thanks for the updates on A, B and C. I kind of got a bit to say on the whistleblower policy and the QAC thing, but just in terms of the regular reporting side of things, thank you. Great stuff. I'm kind of keen to understand how a little bit more about how the framework is working in action. And I've had a look at some other council, how they run their meetings, I guess. And I guess this is a discussion for around the table as well. But in terms of, could we do a deep dive into an issue every now and then? And it wouldn't have to be at every meeting, and it could be as the committee decides there's an issue, but to understand how the framework works in practice and the outputs of it. So looking at a treatment plan, looking at where things might have gone wrong. I'm thinking at the moment, shot of a wastewater disposal field, and trying to understand how the reporting framework that we've had in the past maybe has led to it not being quite as visible an issue, and then all of a sudden, how would you feel, and I guess how would the other committee members feel about having a bit of a deep dive into an issue every now and then so we can understand how it works in practice? So
it's more of a reflection you're talking about, Nikki.
It's not so much of a question, but it is a question for whether it's something that we'd like to do as a committee and whether it's something that staff would be open to doing.
Through you, Chair, I'm happy to respond to that. Certainly from my perspective, more than happy if there's an item that this committee wants me to have a look at and talk to. We have done that at the request of the committee. So Shotover was on the agenda last time. The wastewater treatment plant, we did a detailed review of the risks and reported that and discussed it from memory in reasonable detail. Just to touch on that as well, Chair, as the report mentions, we are in the process of redrafting our risk management policy. There is an intent that we have a workshop with Council on that before we seek that to be adopted by Council. Happy to use that forum if that's useful to also touch on any specific risks that this committee want me to. No problems with that.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense, Gareth. So that's a review and coming up with recommendations from any issues that arose through that. So Nikki, that's happening.
So yeah, and just to be clear, that what we had last time, I think it was quite a short overview. I guess I'm thinking of something that using one of these current issues to explain more how the treatment plan is working in action, what the treatment plan looks like. We talk about treatment plans, but we've never seen a treatment plan, so it's hard to understand how it works in action. So I kind of mean a deeper dive into one topic that sort of helps to explain the framework and how it's working in practice, whether it's working in practice, we can sort of, anyway, I'll leave that with you.
Yeah, well, Gareth,
Take it offline.
Yep, okay.
I have just a couple more, sort of in the same vein, just in terms of how we operate. And this may be coming with the compliance framework, but Sholiver was raised as a risk, and obviously you bring new significant risks to us, but we don't have anything to track how significant risks are, like the Sholiver water dispersal field, how they're tracking. They're not constantly in front of us as I know there's a theoretical risk that we have, but the actual risks, should those be front and centre? Because over the years, I would have thought that the Sholiver wastewater dispersal field, that we would have had more reporting on that. And I've raised it around the quarterly reports as well, and we've talked about having that, come into that reporting, but I've been confused.
Well, I'm trying to understand what you're driving at, councillor, because we have it in the risk framework. We have operational and treatment risks as how exactly we're responding now, which is working with the ORC, working with we've funded money in to upgrade that. We're implementing stage 3 of the plan. So the whole of council's work program is effectively a treatment program for the topic, and I suppose that's always going to be risk-based.
And I guess I'm sitting on this side of the table without that level of visibility. And so how do we make sure that things proactively come to us and stay in front of us at the right level of detail, so that, because that one I think highlighted some issues with the reporting process for me, sitting as governance. I just feel like there's a gap when a new significant risk comes along. I didn't see that a little, maybe a lack of funding around the parks, to me, isn't one of our significant risks. We have very significant risks, and the community can see those significant risks. And I think it would be useful to have probably a better understanding at a governance level of how the treatment plans are managing those risks, mitigating those risks. I want to understand who's talking to who at the right time, who's letting people know when things happen. We've had some discussions around this, Gareth, but I'm just concerned that there are some gaps from the information that I've had in the background as a deputy infrastructure chair and through those discussions. Yeah, and it just might take some working through, because maybe I'm not communicating what I'm wanting very well. And we can take that offline.
Yeah, well, maybe if you take that offline, there is a risk register and there's a matrix.
Yes, yeah, but it's theoretical, and so a risk sits in a box. For example, you've got the risk of that we're not adapting correctly to climate change, and it's sitting in a rare box. But it's just a risk in a box. We've got real practical risks, and what I'm interested in understanding at a governance level is not just whether we have the processes in place, but how effective are the processes that we have in place. And to do that, you need some evidence of those things working in practice, not just the theory and the fact that they're sitting there and that we have them. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm happy to respond, Chair.
Yeah, thank you.
I mean, from my perspective, the report that I put in front of you tries to call out exactly what you've asked for in terms of risks that we've identified through the reporting period. My view is we'd go into a reasonable amount of detail to provide you an oversight of the number of risks we've pulled out now. They might not be the significant risks in front of council, but they are the significant changes for the reporting period. That's not a criticism of the question. It's more, if there's additional context that we need to provide around enduring risks, then I'm happy to do that. That's something that I can incorporate into my report. The specific one is reported through the infrastructure committee. And I raised last time, there are different mechanisms for reporting. My view is that one does sit in the infrastructure committee. I'm happy to provide a summary if it would be helpful to the audit, finance and risk committee, but it is considered in a reasonable amount of detail by the infrastructure committee.
So we did have a report to the infrastructure committee at the last meeting over in Wanaka, and we were given the list of reports. And when I asked, well, look, could we have some oversight of, the risks around these different things? It was like, well, no, it doesn't sit in this space. This isn't the report for it. it's going to sit somewhere else. I guess my question is, where is it clearly sitting as a comprehensive overview of the ongoing risks? There is some in the quarterly report, but this is the Audit, Finance and Risk Committee, and I'm just wondering if there's a space. I know this sounds exhausting, but I just feel like there's a gap, because I feel like the things that are highlighted are relatively insignificant compared to some of the risks that are facing us and through the media.
Well, I mean, I think the media is one lens, but I mean, I think, you know, the question really is, you know, this is around our risk system. This has demonstrated that we map those risks, the very risks that the risks that Gareth's identified, and the way we treat those are operational responses. I'm not sure that the Audit, Finance and Risk Committee is, you know, questioning whether actually delving into each individual risk at a level is the right thing to be doing, as opposed to, have we got a system in place? Are we operating that system effectively? Are we dealing with risks when they arise?
So that's the question. How do we understand if the risks are being dealt with effectively? How do we understand if the strategy and the framework that we approve, how do we understand that it is working effectively?
So Nikki, you'll see here we've got the matrix, and if there's any change in the tier 1 risks or any of the risks, then they're noted. And so if there's a change in status from the last report, I would expect to see some commentary, and that's how risk matrices and risk profiles work.
Through the chair, I wonder if I can help here.
Please.
So risk management is about identifying where there is a potential risk. Issue management is what I think you're thinking of. So once it's become an issue, it then it isn't a risk anymore. It's actually an issue. It's actually something that we will report on through the relevant committee. So there's two parts: it's risk management and issue management. So the wastewater treatment plant is an issue that we were working through.
So in terms of the issue not coming to the table for years, really, in any significant way, and it getting to the point that it's at now, where does that failure sit? Because I see it as a level of failure, that governance was not across there. What I'm trying to understand is the framework that we've got and the reporting that we've got here, is it highlighting, because within issues there are ongoing risks. There's clearly ongoing risks for that treatment plant. I just find a lot of this is very theoretical, and we've got no way to sort of go, you know, I can sort of that risk might be in the wrong
risk
box.
being raised here, and I've been raised here, the infrastructure committee, wanting to understand. We had a report on it and how they're dealing with the issue. And yeah, okay, there could be still risks reported here and around that. The matrix does provide a very high level position. I guess things will move as the operational team address the issue. Then maybe reducing any future risk of things happening, because it's addressing the issue, getting rid of the problem, and therefore the risk will change, and that'll be reported in here. That's the way I would see it. But for us to have a full report from infrastructure at this meeting about how we're doing, I don't think we're duplicating.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying we need some oversight of how it works, how the system works in practice, and your use.
Yeah, look, the system we've got running here is identical to what I see in other organisations. It's no different. And yes, it's not a perfect world. Things will happen. But as long as we've got processes and it's picked up and it's reported on, and Lyle's just set out how this particular problem has been reported. It's not a perfect world. You won't be 100% all the time, but it's a process. You've got your matrix. And as long as that's reported against any changes, then that then raises the flag.
Right, and just the last question on this one, just thinking about A, B and C, was just around where legal sits. Now, I think this is an interesting, sorry, that's probably the wrong way to frame it. We have lawyers that sit within the council, and lawyers are there to work with them and in the best interest of their client. And for me, there's been some confusion over who is the client. Is the council the client? Is the chief executive the client? Therefore, can councillors be refused information? So I'm not getting to my point very well. What I guess I'm suggesting is that we've got the 3 lines model that's coming to us, getting worked up. We've got a compliance framework that's coming in. We've got a whistleblower policy that requires people make decisions about whether there is serious wrongdoing. I'm wondering, and please take it the right way, if there would be some use in having not just an accountant sitting in that team, but also someone with legal background, because there are legal questions around compliance, around the whistleblowing policy and around all of this work. And I have this concern that if it's considered within the organisation that the client is the executive leadership team, and not the independent risk and compliance team, or the councillors even, that you can sometimes have advice that is not as frank or freely distributed or as objective as it could be. I just see a risk in that all of our legal sits with the executive leadership team, and just wondered anyone's thoughts on that. What is
Page you wanted to.
Oh, so I guess I'm looking at A, B, and C. So we're talking about how the 3 lines model looks. So we're developing that and who sits in what role and who has connections to what. We're developing a compliance framework and policy into the future. And we've also got a whistleblower policy, obviously, that we're looking at today. So to me, it was just something that was applied to all 3. And I was interested in the value of that, because I know as a councillor, I've been refused visibility of legal advice because it was confidential and legally privileged. Therefore, it must have been considered that the client was the chief executive and the management team. And as governance, I was not able to see that. It wasn't considered appropriate. Now, I see it as governance would be the client in, every case. But that's not how the organisation sees it. Therefore, do we need to have some independence around that legal advice sitting in that compliance team, which is supposed to have a level of independence, right? So if that team has to rely on legal advice that's coming from lawyers who are working for the executive, who are the client, you haven't got independence in legal advice, I guess, is what I'm saying. And I just wondered if anybody had thought about that going forward, and whether there would be some value in having either the ability for that team to access independent legal advice.
Well, later on in the report, we've got a whole raft of independent lawyers, firms out there that are contracted to do
I'm just thinking about the
legal work for the council. So it'll be up to the teams if they, I guess, if the compliance team wanted legal advice, I don't know, there seems to be a whole raft of lawyers out there they could ask.
Well, this is what I'm just asking. Is there a level of independence? Can that team get independent legal advice?
Well,
For itself?
arguably, if they felt that there was some necessity to do so, I haven't at any time seen that our legal team or the legal panel have been unable to provide solid, accurate, free and frank advice by either to any part of council that they're working for or to me.
But you've withheld legal advice from the council.
We've held legal advice because we have active cases in hand, and on behalf of the council, we've made decisions. And that's a very different question to what the topic of this item is.
Because I think, to me, it relates to the development of the compliance framework. It relates to the structure of the 3 lines model, which is in this report. And it relates to how we're going to implement a whistleblower policy and whether there's independence and legal advice. Because if you have a legal team that is giving advice to whoever is the receiver of that complaint, but that lawyer feels obligated to protect his client's interests, which may be the executive, then I don't see as independent. So there may be a way of dealing with it where you just have the ability in a fund to go out and seek independent legal advice. But I see that could be a conflict there in different situations, and I'm interested in how we resolve that.
Through you, Chair, I'm happy to respond to a couple of points that Councillor Gladding has made in relation to the report here. So The first of those around the compliance obligations register. So the external lawyers, Wynne Williams, are working for me in that regard. So the advice that they provided has been reviewed by me. Secondly to that, the whistleblower policy has an independent line through Mariano and my team, my internal auditor. And I would envisage it would be quite right if he felt that he needed independent legal advice, he would engage independent legal advice. That's the intent of the independence.
That's great. I just wonder if we can have that reflected in the policies and frameworks as they're developed, so that it's very clear that that's a function that's available or an action that's available to you. And there would need to be budget for that.
I mean, I think in terms of the policy is clear that it's an independent evaluation that sits outside of any management line, if that's appropriate. When it's a whistleblower, that's the requirement of the legislation.
Yeah.
Specifying that they could get independent legal advice, I don't think is necessary. It could be other forms of advice, and listing those in the policies, in my view, would be unhelpful. But it is clear it's independent review and analysis of the role.
Why would it be unhelpful?
Because it could be lots of different advice that's needed. I think legal is one type of advice. We might need advice from people that sit in our people in capability space, for example.
So, Mr. Chair, Brendan in the room. I wonder if Brendan would like to comment.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Thank you, Brendan.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, committee. So it's a really simple answer. Lawyers have one client, that's the council. What you're talking about is the different functions that the different parts of council do. Our professional duty is to advise the client, not to advise the chief executive, to advise the council, to advise the GM of Assurance, Finance and Risk. It's to advise the client. Now, the client may be represented in any instance by one of those people, or by this committee, or by the council. And if the council decides that it wants something, it passes a resolution, it has the ultimate power to do that. So if the council wants legal advice about anything, then it can get it. It makes decisions collectively, though. It doesn't make decisions individually as councillors. So I think that's the difference with what you're talking about here.
So as a hearing panel, considering a bylaw, and we ask for legal advice, it can be refused, even though the legal advice exists.
So the hearing panel is given the job of listening to submissions and collating them, analysing them and providing recommendations to council. It's not tasked with the role of obtaining legal advice for council. When council gets the hearing panel's advice, or the hearing panel flags that perhaps you should get some legal advice about this issue, the council can decide to do that.
So then we would have to have a hearing, and at the hearing we would say we would like some legal advice. We would have to wait until the next meeting and adjourn the hearing until the full council had agreed that legal advice was necessary.
Well,
That's
what happened in that instance was the hearing panel said to the chief executive or to the GM, I can't remember which, can we get some legal advice about this issue? And the decision was made by the chief executive or through the chief executive to give the panel that legal advice, which is what happened.
We didn't get legal advice. We got an opinion based on the legal advice, and the legal advice was withheld.
So what happened was that the chief executive got legal advice and then said, this is council's position on the issue after having got legal advice.
Yeah, but
So
we wanted the legal advice.
yes, but then you're in a public forum, and then there's a problem with throwing legal advice around in a public forum, particularly where there's threats of legal action in that very public forum.
Public excluded to look at the legal advice.
You don't have public excluded in a hearing panel.
Yeah, look, I think this, we're
going down rabbit holes at this point.
Yeah.
I think
Well,
there
one
is an
rabbit
issue
hole.
with who is
Yeah.
the client here.
Yeah.
And I struggle with the chief executive being able to just order legal advice, the mayor being able to just order legal advice, and the council having to convene and decide to agree to get legal advice when it already exists.
Well, there's a process that's followed, and I'm comfortable with the explanation of how things are handled. So I'm comfortable with it. I'm not sure what others feel around the table, but that's my feeling.
Sure, Bill,
Yes.
in terms of practice and process, it's consistent with good practice and process, so I'm comfortable. I'm just wondering whether Councillor Glady can talk to the Mayor or the Chief Executive on these issues that she has. I think this is about the fourth meeting in a row where we've wasted about 25 minutes going down rabbit holes.
but I think it's a good use of the committee's time.
Thank you, Bill.
Councillor Guy wishes to speak. Sure.
Yes.
Thank you, Stuart. Yeah, I'd like to back up Bill's point there as well. I feel I was the chair on the instance of the hearings panel that Councillor Gladding has raised. I was very satisfied with the process as far as the advice we received around that, and confirm what you're saying. This is a risk matrix. We're seeing process, we're seeing checks and measures across here, and I just think we're chasing problems where they're not existing, and I'd like to move it on. So thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, well, we've had good discussions. I now propose to move that we note the contents of this report. Have I got a seconder? Thank you.
Yeah,
Okay, all those in favour?
Aye.
Aye, carried. Thank you.
We have two more
Yeah, we're gonna talk to
recommendations,
those.
sorry.
Yes.
The run sheet.
You've got the protected disclosures.
Mr. Chair, we doing this, doing in 3 resolutions, are we?
Well, that's what Gareth
Okay,
said.
understood, rightio, okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Sorry, no, I flicked an email with the full recommendations.
Has anyone else got any questions on them? Anyone else want to speak to the whistleblower policy?
We've got the whistleblower policy, and then we've got the QAC.
Yeah, so just to, so we've agreed to note the contents of the report. I think you agreed that really covers off A, B and C.
Yes.
And I think now, we're moving to questions around the protected disclosure policy, and it's, so that's the fourth item, and the second recommendation. So I suppose, Mr. Chair, it's open to questions if anyone wants to raise questions on that part of the report.
Yeah, thank you, Mike.
I do if no one else is.
Okay.
Through the chair, happy to wait if someone else has got some questions.
I'll answer a question. First one was running out of time.
Oh,
That's all right.
sorry.
We've moved on. We've already moved past it.
Just so I've been, like, I've had a look through the act, and just quick question, not going to die in a ditch over this, but we've sort of substituted fraud for an unlawful or corrupt or irregular use of public funds or resources. It's probably reasonable, but I think our definition of fraud in our fraud policy is possibly a lot broader than the definition in the act or part of the definition in the act that I think we're trying to capture. So I just wanted to raise that as a bit of a flag. You know, do we want to do that, or do we do as we've done with the rest of the definitions in the policy? Do we just follow the definition in the act? I don't know.
Sorry, to clarification, Mr. Chair, the fraud we're referring to the fraud policy definition in the end.
Yes.
Yeah, and the
Don't
definition.
agree with that.
Yeah, and the definition of fraud in the fraud policy, I think is a lot broader than the definition that I think we're trying to substitute, because it looks like a clear substitution of the words an unlawful or corrupt or irregular use of public funds or resources. I think they're probably similar, but I just wanted to raise that, you know, we've clearly substituted it where we've, for the definition of the fraud policy, where through the rest of the definitions in the policy, we followed the act. And I just wondered why we did that.
Happy to respond briefly if you'd like me to, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Gary.
So just 2 points on that. Obviously, we wanted to make sure that this was consistent with the fraud policy. I know we spent a reasonable amount of time as a committee talking about that definition. This policy and associated process refer specifically to fraud, and that is defined in our policy. The second thing is to say that this went through full external legal review. To your point earlier,
Yeah.
that was legal review for me and my team. So that has been reviewed by lawyers that are experts in the requirements under the Whistleblower Act.
And another question through the chair, just to meet section 29(3) of the Act, which is about how we'll publish and republish the information to make sure everybody knows it's there, right? And given that it's applies to contractors, how are we going to get the word out to the subbies and the contractors working on our stuff? Is there a plan to put it through conditions of and deal with it through procurement? And wondering if there is, if that should be in the policy.
Happy to answer that, Chair.
Yeah, thank you.
So obviously we're still waiting for the recommendation from the ARC to council before this policy is adopted. We then have a communications plan in terms of how we're going to communicate this to all people that are captured by this in terms of contractors. We don't have the detail of that, but it is clear in the information that we have in this paper that we're intending to do that. So to answer the question, yes, we'll have a communication plan to contractors in place.
Okay, that's great. I just personally, I think that should sit within the policy, so that it's really clear to staff reading the policy, how it's going to be implemented. Another question was just around, it was in relation to section 11(4)(d) of the Act. I think it needs explaining that in the policy that if the disclosure discloses to others, not on a confidential basis and not for the purpose of seeking advice, that they're not protected. It's just not captured in there. So anyone reading it may think, you know, I'm protected, but actually if they've spoken to somebody else about it, not for the right purpose and not on a clearly confidential basis, then they are no longer protected, I think. That was just my reading of it, but I just thought that might need adding. And I think 5.4, sets out the process, but there's no reference to their right to disclose further. So if there's a decision from the person who received the information and may have looked into it and done an investigation, if they decide that it doesn't need to be taken further, it's not clear from the policy, although I think it would be obvious to most people, but I think it would be worth adding that there is a right to disclose further. If that makes sense, that's not the end of the matter.
Again, through you, Chair,
Yes.
my view would be is that first question around when you're not protected is covered off in section 7.1 of the policy. That's consistent with the legislation. Second point, it is clear in the policy. I can't find the specific section now around how you can choose to proceed to an external entity if you want to take that matter further and you feel that the process to that point hasn't been adequately resolved to your satisfaction. That is set out in the policy. I'm sorry, I just can't find the section.
Yeah, I couldn't find it, but that's okay.
Fine.
And look, final question was, or comment really, was just that it looks like it's tried to be a guide to the Act, which are lawyers, if you've gone to lawyers, that's what they will develop for you. But it doesn't go further in developing a policy around, you know, when do we review it? There's no clauses around oversight of how it's working within the system. There's nothing in there for the receiver of the information other than what's in the Act. So it doesn't develop our processes for how are you going to identify if there's serious wrongdoing and what do you need to consider, what shouldn't you consider. It's just a replication of the Act in simpler words. And I think if we're developing a policy, there should be some more detail around that stuff. It may be that it's really hard to do, having not done it. So it may simply be that we need a review clause in there that says that we will revise, you know, this will improve over time. But at the moment, it's not really a policy, it's just reflecting the Act. That makes sense.
Again, happy to respond for you, Chair.
Yes.
There is a requirement to have a policy that is consistent with the Act. So obviously we've endeavoured to meet that need. There is a review date in the policy. This policy has been drafted by our internal auditor, then reviewed by legal. So our internal auditors made sure it's consistent with the Act. And we do have tools. So the paper does reference the fact that we have a number of tools that we'll use, including a checklist for anybody that's in receipt of a disclosure. So my view would be that everything you've asked for, Councillor Ladding, is already
Was the checklist in?
And also, look, it's subject to review in December 27. So the policy, all policies should be reviewed, and there is a trigger here for this. So look, I think we've had enough debate on this.
We don't just talk anything.
What was that?
Well, I just feel that we're here as a committee to talk about things, but I feel like the input is frustrating.
But you've made your point, and it's going to be reviewed, and you asked about a review clause. I think that's the review clause in there. Is that what you're saying, Gil?
Yes, it is, yeah.
Let's encourage good debate around this
Yeah.
table. It's important.
Yeah, Nikki, what would be helpful is if you've got points to raise, it would be helpful if we got those ahead of the meeting, so it's not a surprise on people.
If I could just make a comment through, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Don't disagree with you, Councillor Glading, that we should be having good, robust debates. So before this meeting, I spoke to Gareth about this policy and said, have we ever had a whistleblower? He said, no, we never have. So I would like to just, in a risk-based context, say this policy is more than adequate, I believe, and the likelihood of it being used is probably pretty low. So the requirement for intensive debate around it is probably not.
So I bring it to the table.
Because we need to adopt
We
it.
need to technically recommend. Not why I'm here.
Okay. My intention now is to put the A, B, and C to the meeting. I'll move.
We haven't, are we, so we're not discussing, we're doing QAC next, is that right?
I'm sorry, I thought you'd. Yep, happy for you to, if any points on that, but we have to make it quick because we're running out of time. So, Nikki, you obviously got some points on the QAC.
I just wonder why we bothered going to the effort of reading this and writing significant notes and trying to improve things if it's not wanted. Like, I don't understand why we're here at this point. Yeah, I do. I have quite a lot to say about this one. Be great if somebody else had something to say.
Okay, I'll say, I think this is good. I understood the intention of, we're not to replace the QAC board, but we did want some further reporting. We've asked for it. We've got a framework for that reporting, and it's here. And yeah, I think what we asked for has been provided. So I support the work that's been done on that. I didn't have any actual questions on it. Be good to see it up at the first reports coming through.
Yeah, it was after we've received the first report. So any other comments other than Nikki at this point?
It's also the only one having anything to say. Look, I do have some concerns around this, that it potentially wasn't what I expected anyway out of our initial discussion. And I remember we weren't entirely specific, but I think we expected QAC to come back to us ahead of gateway decisions. This isn't that. This is reporting 6 monthly, but it doesn't mean that we will have any oversight ahead of a major decision necessarily. And I guess look, I've got a lot of things I could say on this, but that's the key one, and I'll leave it at that because everyone's frustrated with my input. But I don't think this satisfies the intent of the last resolution on this of the Audit, Finance and Risk Committee, which was to have conversations. And I would have expected QAC to sort of be in the room and to sort of have a discussion of where they're at, to actually see where they think their gateways are sitting. We just don't have that information yet, and I'm a bit concerned about the set dates for 6 monthly reporting. I'm not sure that it does necessarily what we needed it to do. The one other thing that I wanted to say is that this speaks to sort of 3 tiers of projects at different levels. It doesn't give us any indication of governance of the whole. As I understand it, all of these projects are necessary to be completed. And yes, it's useful to break things down individually, but there's no sort of oversight of how they're governing the holistic package of works and how that holistic package of works is sort of influencing their program. There's also, last point, nothing in there around assumption reporting, and I think that's needed. I think the key assumption is around expansion of the noise boundaries beyond the term of the 10-year plan. And it's just not dealt with anywhere. I think a lot of people will assume that QAC thinks it can apply to expand its noise boundaries beyond that date. I don't know how the people in the framework and with the responsibility they have, how they're treating that uncertainty. And so I think key assumptions need to be reported clearly.
Yep.
and
So
we
just pick up on that, Nikki. Let's see what the first report has, and then we can go back to them with our input as to where we may feel it's inadequate, if that's the case. But let's have the first report and let's look at that first.
Yeah, Stuart, Bill,
Yes.
I mean, I think we're going to keep the focus on why do we need this reporting, and that's around the risk to the dividend from the capital expansion. And I think that's how I focus on it. I'm not going through and second guessing the governance of the project by the QAC board or their sub board. Ultimately, it's about what's the risk to the council through them making investment decisions that will negatively impact on dividend flows over the 10-year plan period. And that's the focus. I mean, I take your point, Nikki, about people not making comment, but ultimately I'm an experienced governor, audit committee member. I focus on the stuff that's exceptional in terms of stuff that doesn't make sense, not consistent with good practice, and that's our role. And to raise issues with council when we see issues that actually don't meet good or best practice, not going through line by line and trying to edit documents. That's not what I'm here to do.
It's not what I'm trying to do, so please don't suggest that that's what I'm trying to do.
But that's how it comes across.
Can I just, through you, Chair, add one point that might help one of Councillor Gladden's queries? I did say in the report that one of the things that I was picking up with QAC was exception reporting. So
Yes.
obviously gateway reporting goes to the board, 6-monthly reporting comes to us. The framework that they have set out does talk about exception reporting. So exception reporting between that 6-monthly meeting is noted in there. So my point of clarity is how is that done? What triggers that? And what type of report would this committee receive? So hopefully that responds in part to your question, Councillor Gladden.
Yes, and there's also the ability for me to meet with the chair and with the CEO as well. Okay, any further comments? If not, I'll put the motion again on A, B, and C.
Do you want to read it out? Sorry, I haven't got I haven't got an A, B, and C. That might have been what you sent through. Was it, John?
Well, the first one was, I just having to go back
I've
in my
got-
notes.
I've got what's in the report, which is just to recommend.
So
to
we've
the
got
council.
so we've got the,
We don't need to read it out, Chair.
yeah, so we've got protected disclosures, we've got QAC, and then we've got the risk matrix.
The risk matrix. What?
Could
you read it out, John?
Note the contents of this meeting.
Can you just read the recommendations out? Because the recommendations in the report, I'm not sure why there's a variation to what's been provided.
Yeah, there's an error in the run sheet.
Okay, so can you read the recommendations out from the report so that everybody's clear, John?
Yeah, so the recommendations from the report are: 1, note the content of this report; 2, recommend to council that it adopts the proposed protected disclosures, protection of whistleblowers policy, and revoke the existing policy from March 2017. And clause 3, recommend to council that it approves Queenstown Airport Corporation's proposed framework for capital reporting.
Thank you, John.
So my understanding is that we've already adopted one.
Yes, we have.
Yeah,
yes.
so
2 and 3.
it's
That's what I-
putting 2 and 3, so you need a seconder, you need a mover and a seconder for that.
And I'm happy to move.
I'm happy to second.
All those in favour?
Right.
I carry.
Against.
Thank you.
No,
Thank you.
sorry, I'm against. Can I have that noted?
Okay, you want that recorded, Nikki?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Okay, moving to insurance update. So Bridget.
Thank you, Chair. I will just give a brief overview of this report and the reasons that this report is being brought to AFRC. So I usually provide an update of the insurance market and our response to that via our insurance strategy through my risk and compliance update. We recognised through that that we needed to do a little bit more work to provide additional information to AFRC on renewals. So just a reminder, we have 2 key dates for our renewals. I won't go through every policy, each of those renewal dates, but broadly, the most significant insurance policy for November, which is outlined in this report, is our catastrophic event policy that covers infrastructure insurance, and that's a collective policy that we hold with several other councils. And then we have an April renewal. The April renewal broadly is our material damages and other connected policies. So what we're presenting to you today is an overview of the market, our approach to the November renewals, and also to introduce Bridget Allen, who's joined me at the table. This is Bridget's report. Bridget has experience, as it says in the report, of placing insurance in the London market, so very experienced in terms of the placement of insurance, like our infrastructure policy, our catastrophic events policy is placed in the London market. We're very lucky to have Bridget on board. She's with us for 6 months to do broadly a deep dive and connected to that, incorporate training so that we as officers have a good understanding around what insurance policies do we have, why do we have them, what do we need to do in the event that we think we have a claim, and also to evaluate our approach to insurance and ask ourselves questions around whether that model works. Obviously, she's done that to a point for November, noting that she's only been with us before the November renewal, a month and a bit, and the maturity in this space will obviously continue to increase as Bridget gets her head around our cover, our collective agreement, and what that means. You'll see on page number 58, we've incorporated in just a summary of the changes and movements in the market and what that means for our policy. We, as it says in the report, have been reasonably able to accommodate some additional changes in terms of cover, and I'll touch on those in a minute. And the reason for that is that there has been additional capacity incorporated into the market from Singapore. So London has had to respond to that. This year has been reasonably favourable for the previous years when we talked about insurance. We've seen fairly significant uplifts, anywhere between probably 10 and 25% in some line items. Probably at that point, I'm happy to touch on the detail, and obviously Bridget is able to respond to any questions that the committee may have.
Okay, we'll open up to questions.
Yeah, it's Bill. Just in terms of the boarding exclusion, how sustainable is the 45 million in terms of the aggregate? What's your assessment and potential risk to us, if any?
Through you, Chair, I'm happy to provide an initial response. And then
thank you.
Bridget can probably provide some additional context if that doesn't answer the question. So what Mr. Moran is referring to is the fact that we have a collective layer now for building consent claims. Obviously, that slightly changes the model that we have for insurance. There are a number of councils who were not able to gain cover through their existing route. They have now been incorporated into our cover, and that's meant some changes in terms of our cover. We have some layers in our cover that are collectively held with a number of councils. To answer the more detailed question, we are doing a review of that. We are responding to the understanding that that will be incorporated into our policy. We only learned that fairly recently. So from my perspective, I don't have a detailed response, but happy to bring that back at the next committee if that would be helpful.
Yeah, I suppose a follow-up question is, given the limitations on actions for weather tightness, etc., you know, how big is our risk?
Yeah, good question.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm happy to bring that back. I don't have the detail for you. I know that via the legal team and obviously with Chris English, the building consents manager, we do review our potential exposure in that space. We have risks on the risk register, so I'm happy to summarise those at the next meeting if the committee would like me to do so.
Yeah, Stuart, if we could amend action so we can come back on that.
Yeah,
Thanks.
that's great. Thanks, Bill.
Mr. Chair, sorry, on that one, I just missed the first other question. Which layer, which line was that on the table?
This one here, this is-
Oh, okay.
So this is our building act exclusion.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, so that exclusion.
Mr. Chair, I think we're in Brendan's legal update, which is in public excluded, we can provide some update to some of Councillor, some of Mr. Moran's questions.
Yes.
Just
Okay.
a quick question on the very quick explanation of the difference between primary layer and excess layer. Can you just explain very briefly what the main difference there, what are they?
Through you, Chair, I'll refer that to Bridget.
Yeah, good delegation. Yeah.
The primary layer is combined general and products liability, and then the excess layer sits above that, and that includes professional indemnity as well.
Okay. But that's something someone should read.
Yeah, so that professional indemnity line up 20%.
Just one question for me, just, and welcome to the team.
Thank you.
Just wondering, if we're still waiting for confirmation on whether the transit exception, what the implications are for, just thinking of OPEX budgets. What's the timeframe for getting a better understanding of whether those premiums are gonna rise? Or whether they're gonna
Through you, Chair,
not rise?
just in terms of clarifying the question, are you specifically referring to the catastrophic event policy?
Under infrastructure loss and modelling, I don't think so. I don't know. I'm looking at point 12. Under infrastructure loss and modelling, QLDC is still waiting for confirmation that the London market has accepted this change and associated implications for final premium. I just wonder if there's been any update, because sometimes these are obviously written along.
Okay, through you, Chair. Yeah, there have been increased. We got notified on Monday.
Right.
So, yeah, the sublimit's been increased to 240 million, and the programme to 500 million.
So the premium is,
We've got the premiums
and it's the up to date, so that line is no longer.
No, that's not up to date. So for the increase in sublimit, it'll be an extra 90k, and for the increase in the programme limit, it's an extra 60.
Okay, so it didn't go up. Thanks.
So, my question, Mr. Chair, just on the CDM, this government funds 60% of eligible costs. So, how does that? Have you understand from previous other council? How does that negotiation with council getting that 60%? How do you come up with that value? Is it the risky process? Or?
Through you, Chair, I'm happy to answer that question with I suppose, a high-level response to that, how it works. Bridget has done a more detailed analysis for us to understand that. She can also talk to that if necessary. So, broadly, we have to go through a process called loss modelling. So we understand the value of our assets, and then we lay a model across that to understand what's likely to be damaged under certain scenarios. We then have to evidence the total losses, and then evidence that we have insurance up to 40% of those potential losses under worst case scenarios is probably the easiest way of explaining that.
Okay, yeah, I think I read that split out.
Yeah, so you're right, Gareth. Over there, I'm involved. The council's picking up the 40%. The government has committed to 60% with the new banks for the Waia River. So that's a situation at play at the moment. So it's really up to the citizens as to whether they, over what period they repay the commitment by the council. So that's being debated at the moment. Any other questions? If not,
I'll move, Mr. Chair.
yeah, thank you, Lyle. Got a seconder?
I'll second that. I'll second
thank
that.
you, Lisa. Okay, all those in favour?
Aye.
Aye, carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bridget and Gareth.
Thanks.
So we've got Petty and Alison.
Okay, morning all. Just before I introduce the next paper, I would like to introduce the committee to Alison Kelly. So Alison's on my right here. She's our new team lead for management accountants and has been with council since around June. Alison's team has responsibility for putting together this financial update. Next to Alison's Jeremy. You will be familiar with Jeremy. He's our capital reporting specialist. Within the first quarter financial update, the paper is taken as read, but there's just a couple of headlines I'd like to note. Overall, within the net OPEX space for the first quarter, counts as a $2.2 million operating variance. That's favourable. However, we are forecasting this to be a 0.7 deficit by the year end. Our forecasted deficit is due to cost pressures within power, which we are currently reviewing, and also within infrastructure maintenance, mainly as a result of roadie network issues due to weather events, and also just some Three Waters cost pressures as well, particularly just with the sludge removal. Also, just to note, at the start of the year, our weighted average interest rate percentages was higher than the budget. However, with the recent OCR rates, we are seeing the lower rates starting to flow through, which is quite positive, particularly for our floating debt. And then just noting within the CapEx, we are tracking okay financially for the first quarter. We have traffic lighted, some amber and red commentary within the report, and that's just for your attention on some specific projects. So happy to take any questions, and the report is for noting.
I do, just a couple. Chair.
Yes.
So just thanks, Stuart. The sorry, the 0.7 mil expected operating deficit by the end of the year, that's up to date, is it? So that's looking at Crown Range issues, Canlock Road issues, in terms of, because we're sort of saying infrastructure maintenance is over, in terms of an up-to-date look at that figure of 0.7, is that incorporating those issues?
The update was for the end of September, so that include those
exactly.
recent ones as well. We are working through that. I'm not sure if we've got an updated decision.
The deficit has increased, sorry, through the chair. The deficit has increased. Sorry, I don't have the number.
No, that's fine.
I apologise. It has increased from 0.7 to at the end of October. I mean, obviously, you know, as better information comes to light.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That was just why I just wanted to clarify that figure in light of everything that's been going on. It does mention that there are some actions being considered to mitigate the deficit. Is there any more information on what those might be?
Power review is a big one, so we're trying to get a handle of where we are at overspend is. And then just in the infrastructure maintenance space, just sort of looking at where we are with contracts and any stuff that could be reduced in service.
Okay. Did we have any luck with that in the past? Because I know we talked about that last year when we had overruns and they crept up through the year and the operations just got bigger and bigger. But I don't know that we saw any meaningful mitigation of that. And I'm just concerned because it's the start of the year. We don't want to get to the end of this year and have the same situation where we don't have the debt available to necessarily take that OPEX and just chuck it on debt. It would be good to see some really meaningful understanding of what's going on in terms of mitigating that OPEX increase so that it doesn't get to where it did last year.
Yeah, and that's a fair point. We're obviously here at next committee as well, so we could be, we'll provide an update on that forecast.
Yeah, it'd be good to have.
So I think the other thing is that there are ebbs and flows across the entire business. So there are savings in interest rates, for example, which offset some of the increased costs. Council also makes decisions along the year to add projects or adjust projects as well. So I think the key thing here is that we've got a real understanding of at this point, what our deficit looks like, so we can continue to plan towards trying to minimise any negative change. And that's the key role of this across the entire budget of council.
Yeah. It would just be useful to understand that in some more detail. And final question, thank you, Stuart, is just on, it's a very specific question and I might not understand, but page 60.20, it just speaks to the streetscapes, which is sort of rounding out. But then it says towards the end of that process, QLDC will be in a stronger position to identify the final turnout cost, including risk and appropriate levels of contingency to hold. And I was just wondering, I might be really confused, but why are we holding contingency for a project that's complete? I just didn't understand the paragraph, thought I'd better ask.
Still waiting on potential stormwater variations from the Alliance. It's just unknown at the moment.
Is this around the mountain?
Street upgrades. So it's about 2 million budget remaining, and it's mainly for closeout and minor works, but there's a chance that we might get that stormwater variation. So until that's
Okay, but
confirmed,
that contingency is all within budget?
it's all within budget, yeah.
Yeah, perfect,
Yeah,
thank you.
definitely anticipate a surplus.
All
But
right,
they're
cool.
just not kind of throwing out there as reallocate it somewhere else.
Thanks, I understand. I just thought that was kind of done, but it goes on for a while, doesn't it? Thank you, that's all from me.
I think probably voting, councillor Ann, that even when projects are completed, there is always a hangover period. There are always the inevitable things that don't quite work, and it's prudent to maintain some capacity to finance those.
Yeah.
Just a question quickly, just on the debtors. So that's an improving situation, and also the rate arrears. So is that a timing issue, or it is genuinely improving?
That is generally improving. There's a bit more of attention going into that focus now. Obviously, I've had the bank leaders historically, but we're also being a bit more proactive with the communications in there and getting that out. Also just getting that messaging out, education about the repayment plans as well, which is definitely helping.
Great, good work. Any further questions from the table? If
I see
not,
Lisa's got her hand up.
okay, Lisa.
Thank you, Stuart. Yeah, 2 quick questions from me. First one, paragraph 3, page 65. While it's great to see the regulatory income is favourable to us, my question is probably reflecting if any of our community are listening in and questioning that being mainly relating to parking fees and parking infringements. Perhaps if anyone could speak to, I'm linking it to our annual report, an amazing piece of work in there, so much reading. We're gonna get to that later, but congratulations to all involved in putting together that report. It's very comprehensive. On page 59 in that report, it talks about reasonable application of our regulatory enforcement of parking fees and parking infringements, and there's been a lot of community question about whether we are applying reasonable application. And an example I was given just a couple of days ago was again a pause on a dotted yellow line in Arrowtown at about 7:15 one night to pick up a passenger who had walked out of the dairy and got into the car, and the vehicle was hardly even paused. And this was challenged to me as not being reasonable application. And are we just revenue generating through our regulatory channel there? So if anybody would like to, I understand the guidelines of inconsiderate parking and other considerations that we really are following the letter of the law, but perhaps to give some indication to our community, is that sort of infringement seen to be an educational shot across the bow, that you just don't go anywhere near a yellow line anywhere in the district, because it would appear that was perhaps quite a vigorous application of that regulatory rule in an example like that, and there's many of those examples. If anyone could comment on that one, and then I've got one other question.
I'll comment on that. So certainly we do not use our fine and regulatory regime as revenue generating. They are revenue recoveries at best for the services that we provide. And I think what we do is we apply all our rules in compliance with the policy that the council has in place and the rules that they have in place. If people want to challenge those regulatory fines, then there are processes for them to do that. But I could probably write a book on the number of times people have told me that they were only paused there for a microsecond and the council fined them. Reality is often very different. So I certainly don't think that we are being overly ambitious in our enforcement of any of the rules that we apply across the district.
Thanks, Mike. I suppose that, last meeting I spoke of, the three types of risk I probably think of, one being our risks arising from our internal rules and regulations and policies, three being the external risks, and two being the opportunity within the risks that we take. And I suppose I'm coming from the our risk to our social license and acceptance within our community of these things. So it helps to have your explanation. Thank you. My second question is around paragraph 4, personal expenditure, also point 3, favourable to budget with vacancies across the organisation. And again, linking back to our annual report and recent workshops with council, noting that the food licence area in particular, where we're not hitting target because we are having challenges with recruitment, and the very wise insight that officers gave us there, that it takes 3 years to qualify as a food inspector, and we just don't have these skills. I'm curious about other vacancies across the organisation. Are there other areas, and what are they, that we're really finding capacity challenge on meeting, examples like that, 3 years to train as a food hygiene inspector, and probably not many school leavers choosing that as their career pathway at this point. What other areas are we finding it hard to find capability across? Because it seems a challenge to me that we're saving money by not being able to fill slots.
So look, again, councillor, I won't go into detail, but I think there are some areas where we traditionally, our local government either has high turnover in staff or struggles to get staff. Clearly, in the engineering space, getting experienced staff is a challenge. In the planning space, we have a lot of churn. A lot of our consent planners come and go. They're often picked up by the private sector, so we're always re-recruiting into that area. There are other parts of the business where we have traditionally, we're always struggling to recruit, and we have to recognise that this is a difficult market to recruit into. We're a very expensive market for people to relocate to. So that's I suppose that sort of summarises some of the constant challenges. I think the healthy sign, and we've reported on that before, is that we're steadily reducing turnover rates. So our ability to remain a sticky employer for people and to be a good employer, I think, is sort of well up there.
Thank you, Mike. I suppose just a slight extension to that, are we feeling confident within our contractors and suppliers that they also have the capacity and capabilities there? I noted in the annual report that roading, we, again, I suppose, some concerns around our cover of capability in that space, and we field a lot of calls from our community concerned that we may be having the wool pulled over our eyes around the efficiency of roading works and roading teams. Are you confident that they also have their capacity matched to the capital works program that we need them to deliver?
Certainly they're required to deliver against their contracted requirements. We have noted, and we've discussed this in the past, that some of the larger contractors are themselves struggling, particularly post-COVID, to actually acquire and retain skilled staff, and again that sort of flows through a number of contracts, including our own. Our contract managers are in regular dialogue with the contractors, so I suppose we work within that, and we have to mitigate some of the issues that the private sector is also facing. So yep, it's a constant challenge for us to ensure that we're getting the right level of input into meeting those contract expectations.
You think it's getting any easier to find people? Just Yeah.
I'm probably not the right person to ask. Tony might have a better view because he holds the majority of those. Tony, have you got any comment on that?
I don't know that it's getting hard, it's still remaining a challenge for us and for the contractors, and we're in sort of constant negotiation and discussion with them. But it is a constant challenge, as we know. There's no certainties around it, but they are still delivering services and delivering them well, mostly in terms of contracts.
Thank you. That's all from me.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa.
So, Mr. Chair, just a very brief, hopefully, question. Under the debtors analysis, quick one there, I'm surprised the number of 49 outstanding consent debtors, and some of them are quite large. You got any comment on that? Over 50K and the 10 largest outstanding accounts. Is that a regular thing, or is it just hard to get money out of? I guess for that price, they're quite big consents.
I'm happy to comment on that. Sorry, only because it's a really real issue for us, and it's partly influenced by the way that the law is written, and that really does make it really challenging for us to force payment of outstanding debts. And I know that Dave's here, his team have quite a deliberate program at the moment about trying to chase up and force the repayment of outstanding.
So when you talk about debt collection, we actually engage a debt collector.
Yeah, our intention would be, once we've exhausted all our internal measures, that would be our next.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you. So Lyle, you're happy to move the
Sure.
the contents of the report? Oh, sorry, Bill.
Yeah, just a quick one. I don't want to hold things up. I just want to build on something that Nikki said about year end and ups and downs and mitigations. Obviously, our budget's framed within a multi-year context, and our projects, capital projects, are multi-year. And it's sort of taking her point and expanding a bit that where we have changes, particularly negative changes, there being some commentary on the out-year implications in terms of budgets. So we're not just focused on the current financial year, we're also thinking about potential impacts on proposed future spending. And so it could be a little heading paddy with a couple of sentences saying no change. But as Mike said, things do happen in year when new projects come on board. And given that we're debt constrained, it's understanding the trade-offs, decisions that have to be made, mitigations, to actually make those strategic choices. So it may be just an extra paragraph in the report, Paddy, in terms of where there are out-year implications that council need to manage or identify.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Thanks for that, Bill. Happy to include it.
Yeah, well, Stuart, I was going back because there's a lot of good information here, and it flows through obviously into the next week. We're going to do reforecasts and the whole issue we look at all this in each department, P&I and all that. So yeah, I think it's a very good point.
It is, and you know, in the past we haven't reduced as the OPEX goes up in one area. We haven't really cut. It's just gone up and up and up and up and up, and we've put it on debt at the end, and we just can't keep doing that. Got to change.
I'll move, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Lyle. Got a seconder? Thank you, Heath. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Carried. Thank you.
Thanks.
Moving next to sensitive expenditure review. We've got Paddy again, and Alison, and Will.
Yes, Will's unfortunately not able to make today. I'll introduce the paper. The paper has two recommendations. It's to note the contents of the report and also to provide staff with any feedback on what you'd like to see in future editions of the paper. Just the main headline to note: within the first quarter review, all the usual checks and reviews were completed for the quarter. We had a couple of follow-ups that we needed to do, but and that was mainly just for clarification, but overall no major discrepancies were noted. So happy to take any questions, but also really encourage that feedback about what you'd like to see within the report and future editions.
Or what can be taken out is the other.
Yes, yeah.
Yep. Okay, opened up for questions.
Well,
Hey, I've got you ready, Lyle?
no,
Yes.
It's just one, and look, again, it's just about this POs less than 10K and the reporting around that. We did have a discussion, and I think it's more of a question. Is there a risk that if we set the bar at, well, if it doesn't add up to more than 100K, then, you know, it's probably okay. It doesn't kind of be reported. Is there a risk in that? Do you see what I mean? Like people understand that.
The main risk is probably in the number of POs that we look at. So, and I think, you know, we've got time to be doing that now. We do sit down and sort of look at, you know, sort of what could be done there to split it. You know, if it's a $9,999 sort of PO, we look at those things and how they sort of add up.
Are you looking at the ones where they add up to 50K? Because we did talk about that last meeting. And
Yeah, we talked there.
It was going to go through, I think it was going to go through the risk and compliance team or.
Yes, there is. Yeah, we did a sample with well, with Mariana with the internal audit on that, just going through it. It was a smaller subset just because of workload, but we didn't find anything within that. That was going through the full list.
That was chunking at lower, you know, accumulations than 100K.
Yeah,
so,
well,
so you're looking at 50K or 30K.
Yeah, down, at that individual level, and then we're just trying to, and it's an eyeball test, right, as we go through.
And nothing concerning. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Chair, I just question whether we need all the detail on purchase order, card audits and stuff like that. And maybe some of the stuff should be exception reporting, that we want to know where the issues are rather than just
a generic report.
What's happened. Yep. That was my only feedback on it. Yeah, because I think it's good to have the information on the contracts register, but some of that stuff, just a general giving an update on numbers of cards issued and all that, whether we, from your processes, if there's any issues that we need to be aware of. But that's just my thoughts.
Yeah, some of this reporting came about because the transparency around what we were spending with consultants and legal and all the rest of it. And so that's certainly given us a lot of transparency. So now it's just a matter of whether we still require the level of detail.
Well, I think it's good on the contractors and that, but just questioning about the lower level card issue.
Does it take a lot to pull it together, Patty?
The P card?
Is this, I mean, does it take a lot to pull this report together, or it does?
It does take a lot. That's because, you know, there's 4 or 5 key areas that we're looking at. And you've got to go back right into the registers, see what's in there, and then you cross-referencing back as well.
Right. Is it useful for staff as well to?
Is it useful for staff? The delegated powers would be, there's some use, you know, could we have better use of our time? Yes.
Is there a way to make it easier for us to pull it out of the system? As our computer system.
Well, that's fine to get it out. You've got to go through it and do the manual checking at line by line level. So, you know, picking up on the on Lyle's point, do we need line by line, and could we do it more an exception?
By exception, yeah. I think that would be received.
So, Mr. Chair, we could go away. Catherine and Paddy could look at going through this report and identifying, particularly where we've had very stable performance. So we can come back and make some suggestions to the committee about how we can restructure this one.
But it's understand only that
I'm sorry, it just might be that you not do it every quarter.
Well, that could be a way to do it.
Once a year, so that there's still transparency, but it's not an effort every quarter.
Noting the item we got later on internal auditing has picked up on a lot of stuff anyway. So.
Yeah, I was going to say the same, Lyle. Yep.
Oh, happy to move, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you on both those points, noting the content and also providing feedback, which we've done. You got a seconder?
I'll second that, Stuart.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Carried. Thank you. Moving next to health and safety.
I'll do it. I love it.
Yeah, all right.
Thank you.
Okay. No.
So we've got Katie, is it?
Yes, Katie's here. Alan's been unfortunately unwell, so he's not available.
Okay.
Was he recorded on you?
Luckily, it wasn't a health. Well, it was a health issue, but it wasn't a safety issue.
Sorry.
And also would like to acknowledge that
John Winterbottom, the Health and Safety Chair, obviously can't be on this side of the table because he is currently doing the minutes of the meeting.
Wait, chatting with her.
Take one hat off, but no.
Yeah. Okay, so note the contents of the report and take it as read. Would like to cover a few salient points from the report. We've had great participation from our trainings that we've been rolling out. We've had really positive feedback from our contractor health and safety management system that we've been embedding in the organisation. And we're also enhancing the reporting for contractor management incidents as well. Open to questions.
Stuart, that's Bill.
Yeah, thanks, Bill.
Yeah, I mean, these reports are really high quality. On page 109, G, there's a footnote about the increase in trends in relation to contract incidents, not necessarily indicating an unsafe workplace, but better reporting. I've got no doubt that's true, but I think the number of incidents that we see each meeting, and particularly this one, there's 3 or 4 very serious occurrences, sort of begs the question, do we need to do more? Because ultimately, if there were to be a fatality, and we were getting a pattern information which we didn't act on, both councillors, including Stuart and I, and Heath and management will be in the gun. And that's wearing my work safe hat. So it's just a question, is this just surfacing stuff that was already there? So in terms of the level of occurrence, it's no different from the past. But because it's serious, it does create a risk for us and our contractors and contractor management. We've talked about this in the past, but it's an ongoing thing we need to worry about because there could be a fatality. And if we could have done more around our contractor management, the question will come back to us. What do we know? What do we do about it? And if there's a pattern relating to particular contractors or subcontractors, what are we doing to manage them?
Through the chair, if I'm able to respond.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely acknowledge your comments there, Bill. And, you know, we've got a really positive reporting culture with our contractor management. So it's good that we're seeing this reporting coming through. And to give you some surety, every contractor incident that occurs, we investigate. So we liaise with the contractor manager who's responsible for holding that contractor. And then we also have Alan Thomas, our health and safety manager, and then he has robust processes and procedures in place with our internal investigation that we undertake with these contractor management incidences. And anything, if there's a pattern, we absolutely address it directly with the contractor as well.
Have we stood any contractors down at all?
Not in this reporting period that we're referring to. However,
there's Tony.
Sorry, there have been some instances with contractors standing down subcontractors who have failed to follow instructions. So particularly our tier 1 contractors there's been a number of instances of that where there's been, and some staff as well who haven't been able to follow instructions. That's been actions undertaken by the contractors. I don't think there's any contractors that we stood down in this instance. But I'm not Mr. Shed, I suppose.
Stuart, could I ask?
There is a very strong sort of health and safety focus.
Stuart, could I just ask? Stuart, could I ask a follow-up question? I mean, some of these incidents are just nuts in terms of people not clipping into harnesses and slipping on chainsaws. But in terms of the pattern I see in terms of contractors, a lot of it is people striking pipes. You know, whether it's sewer pipes or gas pipes. And the question is, in terms of culpability, is it because the information we're giving them in terms of where pipes are is wrong? So it's us not giving the right information, or is it them having the information, not acting on it, and just taking shortcuts and trying to get the job done quickly? You might be able to comment on that, Tony.
So I think it's a mixture of some information being not accurate, some information being well known and not acted on. We have actually had some instances where contractors have physically talked about where the line is and then proceed to put spikes into it. So there's a lot of training around that. We know that strikes is a real issue for us Some of it is just human nature. Some cases it is service in the wrong place. It's an active program, and there's sort of frustration even with the contractors when one of their staff does something that they shouldn't have done.
And I think in terms of accountability, the fact that these are reported and we talk about the action we're taking to mitigate them are positive. I think the critical thing is if there's a contractor or subcontractor who is of serious concern in terms of shortcuts, not doing the proper education of people within their teams, that we act on it as we know it.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. This is consistent with what I see in other situations where we're using a lot of contractors. And you're right, Bill, you know, people do stupid things. And we're just got to make sure that our messaging is very clear that we expect people to comply by our health and safety standards.
Do we track, do we track the, you know, the pre-work sign-offs and all of that stuff? Do we make sure that those contractors are complying and everybody has read and been trained correctly and ticked off? Is that all in place?
Through the chair, correct, that's part of the health and safety contractor management system.
Yeah.
And we're actually selected as finalists in the Site Safe Awards earlier this year, because of the health and safety contractor manager system. It is excellent.
Well done. It might be good to see, I don't know, see some, if there's a way to highlight some. Thank you.
Lisa's got her hand up. Sure.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa.
Thank you. Excuse me. Sorry. The first one, a little bit of a follow-up to Bill's points around our GIS and strikes. Is there any kind of tie back loop around if we do have a strike, checking back on the GIS and seeing whether it was a discoverable or what happened there? And I'll give you my second question at the same time, though different topic. Education around the serious occurrence of the lithium battery disposal. How are we educating people, and are we seeing vapes is my particular kind of question around this, and an education piece around safe vape disposal? It just seems we've got a proliferation of these devices turning up all over the place. So first question, GIS, loop back. Second question, lithium education.
I can talk in general terms, and also I'll hand over to Tony as well. So in general terms, that would form part of the investigation follow-up from any contractor incident reporting. And just while I've got the floor, the second point to your question about the lithium batteries, when we're looking at that incident investigation report, they're actually part of a national working group for lithium batteries about education. So that's part of the work that they're undertaking at the moment, and they are working on an education program from my understanding. Over to you, Tony.
Thanks. For the lithium, I think maybe the first one. Generally, the investigation of any incident also picks up whether the strike hit something that we knew about or didn't know about, and updates it on that basis. And then the contractors are usually pretty assiduous around checking that, particularly if they've got diggers in place. And they're very robust processes, but it doesn't always pick them up. Lithium batteries is a national problem. The monthly meetings with our landfill contractor continues to raise that as a significant issue. They are reporting lithium fires most months. It's causing real issues. Education wise, there's a sort of national program that thought about what we could do here. We've also had quite big discussions around ways we might be able to reduce the incidence of lithium batteries going in, but it's such a pervasive thing. We're also seeing e-scooters have caused problems. Battery packs on handheld appliances and things. That's more than just vapes. It is a real problem in the industry. No one's got an easy answer to that, unfortunately.
Might I suggest that we look at some more media channels around that, as far as some, I mean, just that one statement that you made then, Tony, that we're experiencing, a fire sort of once a month. I think if public awareness was really brought more to the dangers, that people would just be quite surprised and become more perhaps self-regulating on some of that. And the GIS one, I think when we first started talking about arterials, when I first came onto council, there was a high level still of daylighting of our what is underground. Where do you think we're at overall? Are we 60% confident that we know what's under the ground, or are we still uncovering work that I think the Phoebe project, they told me that they're a lot more confident as to what we've actually got under the ground there. But could you make some sort of comment as to how confident are we that we know our GIS system is accurately picking up these things?
You may not be surprised that I wouldn't put a percentage on that. It's kind of unknown.
Yeah.
What we can say is that certainly with the new projects, everything's been mapped accurately, Phoebe and the arterials and things, but any work in any street will uncover unexpected services. It's just the nature of it. But we tend to have less problems because we have newer infrastructure. So we've tended to replace infrastructure more rapidly. So we'd like to think we've got that accurately recorded, but probably not in every case. One of the outcomes of the P&I review was to beef up our asset management capability. One of the focus of that is to really improve our data collection and verification process. So and the Phoebe project, they've got three-dimensional images and data of all the pipes that were put in them, which will be transferred to council at the end. So new projects, yes, but we do have probably a lesser percentage of unknowns than some other places. I know, for example, Dunedin, that had very old historic records, huge problems, probably much bigger than here.
You may recall, Councillor Guy, that when we were doing the streetscape work in the centre of town, we were discovering unknown pipes about once every 900 millimetres, which caused a major headache for the construction agents. And you'll also be aware, because we do get occasional complaints about it, that we on the big projects here, particularly the arterials, we've used the hydrovac system. That is a significant mitigation against strike, but it's also expensive and it's noisy. But it's one of those things where you're dealing with uncertainty. Using the right technology to try and address that is important.
Right.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions? If not, I'll move that we note the contents of the report. We've got a seconder, Lisa. All those in favour? Aye, carried. Thank you. Move next to climate and biodiversity plan update. So we've got Bill and Kirsty.
So, kia ora koutou, Chair, and to the committee members. It's a pleasure to be here once again. This is the CPP quarterly update, co-authored by Kirsty Pope, myself. The report provides a general overview in terms of progress status of the current 3-year plan. It talks to some key updates on projects over the last quarter, and it also provides some initial kind of framing and insights into the direction of the next climate biodiversity plan, which will be presented to council for adoption at the end of this financial year. That will go from 25 to 28. So I'm happy to take the report as read, also noting that updates against each action are contained on the website, and only a summary of key actions have been provided in the report. Yeah, happy to take it as read and pass to you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Open it up for questions.
Mr. Chair, just quick, talk about the steering group first scheduled meeting. This is, I think, around energy and traditional energy sector infrastructure providers. First steering group meeting for this initiative is scheduled for November. Did that happen?
I'm happy to talk to just briefly to that, but then pass to Mike and Michelle. This reflects relates to the broad work program that's looking at the future energy requirements.
Oh, okay.
So there has been a working group that's been looking at peak energy forecasting out to 2050, and now that work is progressing into the, I guess, the regional development.
Oh, yeah, that's all right, yeah, because it's also coming up in the workshop later on, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
I might just add that the November meeting is rescheduled at transparent request. It's happening now in January. Then
January.
notice for us.
Right.
Okay.
And the other question I had, I just find it's to do with is it the Glenorchy work up the natural hazard investigations? We had a bit of a briefing, I remember sitting in on it. Seems to be going on for a long time. I didn't get a comment. You get a couple of locals there, a few bulldozers put a flood bank in, Bushbury sort of problem, but seems to be a lot of effort behind it. I better be careful what I say.
Yes, through the chair, perhaps you are on the wrong council, Lyle, but look, I will note actually it's a timely update. The regional council just, I believe it was yesterday, the draft adaptation strategy for the Glenorchy and the Head of the Lake area was presented to allow go out to public release for engagement. That strategy will be receiving public feedback between, I guess, December, January, and February. And that represents the assimilation of all of the work that has been going on for the last 4 years.
Okay.
So that showcases both the technical work that's been undertaken, but also outlining pathways for future investment in the area.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, there will be opportunity to feed into that.
Okay, thanks.
I think the previous mayor of Westland built his own stock bank, and that didn't go too well for him, Lyle.
Okay.
No, and it washed out a hotel that I'm a director of.
Yeah, okay, well, we won't mention that then.
No.
I do have a couple. Stuart, if that's okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you. I'll just carry on with the Glenorchy thing to start with. I guess just a question around, they've mentioned in there, I don't know, and I'm not going to expect you to read anything, but they're talking about, I'm interested in the planning framework stuff, because that's relates to property rights and, you know, what are people going to be able to do with their property down the track, what are the planning rules going to be? And I was expecting them to have sort of given some sort of direction, but it seems that they're leaving it for the regional policy statement. Do you have oversight of the timeframes for, you know, implementing whatever direction they're planning on through the RPS and how that's going to affect our budgets? Like, do we have sufficient budget to deal with what might be coming? They seem to be holding back a bit, and I don't know how that affects us, that sort of uncertainty, or whether there is certainty in the background through the working group.
Through the chair, happy to respond, but also open up for any further comments. But particularly with regards to regional policy statement, cannot really comment too much with regards to how that is progressing through the regional council.
Yeah.
Obviously, they have that piece of work in tandem to the adaptation strategy. So the adaptation strategy reflects, I guess, the direction setting that we are seeing, particularly through the approaches to risk management, so financial hazards. There's an alignment there, but I can't comment on with regards to how that regional policy statement's finalisation impact, I guess, on the potential programs that we will be looking at.
Right. Okay. So then I suppose it's, yeah.
And the only other comment I could add is, I mean, and again, I'm not close to that, but I mean, the government is obviously reviewing its climate adaptation legislation. I know there's a lot of work going on inside MFE on that, and I'm not quite sure when that is due to be reported back. Bill or Kirsty might know, but I suspect that is what all the regional councils are going to see about how it shapes what they do, and in particular where they may see liability ultimately falling. And also the timeframes that they expect that to be rolled out over. So one imagines that most regional councils, while they're interested in this area and obviously looking at it, are going to take a policy response based on that new legislation.
Do you think they've taken a conscious decision to wait, given it's imminent?
Well, I mean, I can't speak for any regional council, but it would seem that would be a logical thing for them to at least be alert to.
I guess the thing is we're partners with them, and so, you know, it would be great if we knew a little bit more about where they were going with this, and we've got a working group in the background, and I'm not sure how often that meets or anything like that. It would be helpful maybe to have some more information around our involvement and who's meeting and how often, and to maybe get some more information flow coming back to QLDC governance as well, so that when we're looking at budgets and having to think, well, you know, we're going to need you know, some in the future for stuff that is coming, that we have just a better understanding of what's coming when. Does that make sense?
We could certainly look at updating some of that.
Yes, no, absolutely. And it's important to note that the adaptation strategy brings together information from the current regulatory frameworks and operating through standard natural hazard risk processes, feeding that information, that risk-based information into existing investment programs, the rest of it. So there is a degree of BAU with that. The changes to the national policy settings will be really important, particularly for managing the future of severely affected land. To date, we don't particularly have that. We haven't been affected by the disasters or emergencies like the West Port or the East Coast. But that framework will provide that the funding channels and the regulatory framework for managing, particularly the challenges of management treatment. So there is still a lot up in the air, but those that legislative framework has been up in the air for the last few years. The project has been progressing. Previously going to be under the RMA reforms, and we are now waiting after the recommendations that went through the Finance and Select Committee to see what that new regulatory framework will look like from central government. So it's going to be very important, but the work continues, I think, while we wait for those formalisation of those changes.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it. Look, just another question, and it's just a high level. When you mentioned at the start of the report, one of the risks that I was interested in from the earlier report, the one around adaptation, what is it? 159? In our risk framework matrix thing, it's sort of listed as rare, as in terms of the likelihood of not being well enough adapted to deal with climate change. Rare. Is it in the right spot?
Through the chair, just to respond to that. So this we do have an overarching risk in relation to the challenges of climate change adaptation. So that reflects on terms of council's maturity and ability to manage those challenges. As we cascade into the detailed analysis of where we have exposure to risk, that moves the needle slightly differently. But the focus has been certainly on establishing that maturity in terms of how we're managing the overall challenges associated with the changing climate. One of the areas I will note that as we look at the next climate biodiversity plan is to explore into climate risk scenario modelling in more detailed level of analysis, and that will flow through into understanding the risks associated with climate change to assets and other things, and allowing us to be in a position for potential voluntary risk disclosure around some of their climate risks. So we are building that maturity, and so therefore I think that's risk rating that you see in regards to that 10059 reflects, I guess, where we are in terms of that.
In terms of our understanding, and maybe down the track when we have a bit more information and we've looked at some things like Kinloch Road and various other things that are falling over, maybe we can bump that up or not. I'm interested in where in those matrices, what value they actually deliver. Like, what decisions do we make based on where a dot is placed on a matrix? I don't really understand, but anyway. And I think that covers it, because I was going to ask how your energy sector meeting with any actions fell out of it, but really keen to hear at the next quarterly report if there's any interesting stuff coming out of it. Thank you for the report.
Thanks. Any further questions? If not, Nick, you are happy to move the report, noting of the report?
I'm happy to move the report.
Okay. Got a seconder?
Bill.
Bill, thank you, Bill. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Carried. Thank you. We've now got the Lakeview Development Program with Paul.
Sounded like a leaf.
Oh, Merry Christmas. Oh,
yeah.
Is it Merry Christmas to me?
No, it was Merry Christmas to you.
You can have a Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas.
Oh, Merry Christmas, everyone.
Okay, we'll take your report as read, and if you just enlighten us on any developments or any changes.
Yeah, probably three things. Just an update on where the financials are currently at, the developers program, and the DA milestones is where I go. So, in paragraph 8, we just talked about the financials. Compared back from our last reporting period, there's been no change in the financials at this point. The infrastructure team are still working through the wrap up with the Alliance. So while that's going on, it's tidying up those loose ends, and until that's sorted out, there's a bit of discussion
at the board level. So Tony and his team are working through that. In terms of the developers program, we've been pressing them for a program, paragraph 811 there, I just alluded to them providing that. It's a requirement of the DA through the PCG reporting that they provide us a program. So they've, they will have that to us within the next week or two. And that program, it's more than just milestone dates. It's probably what we would call a full development program with all the construction milestones and everything that would lead them into their stage 1 development. It's the type of thing that we did when we scoped out our own works, and generally best practice here is to go to some sort of third party who would do some form of risk analysis around that and provide us that. So while the developers providing their reporting and how they're going against it, I think we should also prudently look at assessing that and get a view around if there's any exposure for us in their program and work through them with that. So that will be quite key to that, as well as that, you know, those are, I probably don't need to explain big Gantt charts and people looking at all the numbers and providing percentages on certain elements of that. Key to that, we've asked them also is to include in that the DA milestone, so we can then, with that program in the regular PCG reporting that they do, and then they'll provide updates to that, and then I can feed the achievement of the DA milestones into that table too, which is, so my third point, we've now populated based on us achieving council works completion in the satisfaction of stage 1 settlement conditions. We've got a date there of 21 April 25, and then you'll see that it flows down through to on those other dates there. Just to be clear, the first three there, the settlement conditions and the commencement of construction and stage 1 completion, they are target dates. There is a certain amount of flex on those that's embedded in the DA. The fixed settlement sunset day of 21 April 2026, that is a fixed date. So that's how that sits. But apart from that, over to you, Chair.
Okay, open up for questions.
Chair, there's a question on the Alliance extension claim. Is there any feeling, or are you able to talk about the chances there won't be any further claim then?
That's pretty much sits with Tony, and I know that he's working pretty hard on that.
He's right behind you.
Oh,
So, yeah, so the Alliance Board's been working on that. So there's an extension claim related to that, and what we're trying to do is wrap up all of the outstanding claims that relate to Lakeview, and we're confident we're getting very close to that. But what that means in terms of the final budgets is yet to be determined. But it's certainly not closer than it has been.
Thank you, Tony.
I've got a couple. Stuart, no
Yes.
one else is waiting. This one is just page 124.7, stormwater works, because I think our last discussion, at least at the council workshop, was that it was we may do it, they may do it, we haven't decided yet in terms of the stormwater at the back of the buildings. And now it looks like there's been a decision that they will do it. So it says to be completed by the developer and allowed for in subdivision consent approval. I'm just wondering, you know, I'm concerned that there is a level of risk around this in terms of, one, how big we build it, because if we build it to as it was anticipated to be built, we apparently can't remove the trees on Ben Lomond because the stormwater coefficient was that they used would not allow for the tree removal. There would be too much water coming down and hitting the back of the building. I'm just wondering, sorry, I'm not putting this very well. I'm really keen to have some more information around the risks of going into this jointly with the developer and what responsibility sits where, what potential risks are of having that stormwater up against the building, and what our ongoing responsibilities are, and also what you've arranged in terms of how much we'll fund, because obviously we've got, I think, 1.1 or something in the long-term plan for it, and we had said that'll be it. We'll put that into it, but we won't fund any more. I don't get the impression that that's a hard line anymore. So I just think there's a bit more information that we need around the funding risk, the risks associated with doing this jointly, and including ongoing risks, and that risk of what stormwater coefficient we're using, and whether we then run the risk of not being able to remove wilding pines from the environment, if that was something council wanted to do. A few risks in there.
Those are all valid things, and we can start reporting that as and when we work through it. I'm certainly meeting with Tony tomorrow morning on that, and working through exactly what you're talking about.
Okay, what would be the reporting format? Because obviously we only meet quarterly, and this will presumably progress. Will it go through the infrastructure committee? Will it go, where does it sit? The detail.
Well, delivery of that as part of the council works, which sits with the infrastructure team. So it's probably up to Tony how he wants to work through that.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you.
But we will pick that up, as Peter, as was said, in our quarterly reporting.
Yeah, well, that would be great if it came here as well.
Yeah.
And just
Also-
one other question was just, we raised it and it was in a public workshop, so I'm assuming I can raise it here, not around the Lakeview developers 94 feet, but just with the hot pools.
Yes.
There was a request to understand the issues with making private a recreation reserve, and to what extent could you put hot pools in, and allow the developer, I guess, to set the price. There were some issues around that, and there was going to be some advice sort of brought back, maybe legal, maybe not, now's not the time, but I just wanted to raise it because there's sort of a risk around there in terms of the wider development and what we might
So
have to do.
you're right, it's certainly not anything to do with this report, so happy to work through that with you.
But there's work going on.
Yeah, so Brendan and Meredith Connell have been working on that. The previous lease that was, or agreement to lease at least, and the consultation that we did talked about those elements and being consistent with section schedule 1 of the reserves at the Whites and stuff.
So is
That's where we're at on.
this legal advice we can see, or do we need to sit around a council table and agree that we need to see this legal advice? Or will it just be forwarded to us? Sorry, you know.
But I think that's a leading question.
Yeah.
It is, but will we be able to
And
see?
until I know what the information comes back, and if it's general information, we can share it with councillors, but if it's specific, then we can choose what we do with it. I'm not going to answer that question in the abstract, unfortunately.
Right, so it depends on the content of the legal advice, whether councillors will be able to see it or not.
Yeah, so, sorry, I think that overstates it. I mean, I'm not going to answer it in the abstract because I don't quite know what we're going to see.
That's fine, that's all from me, Stuart.
Yep, okay. Any other questions? If not, I'm happy to move the noting of the contents of the report. Have you got a seconder?
And second, Stuart.
Yeah, thank you. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye, carried. Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Right, the next one is the audit of the annual report, but running very late. I have definitely got to cut off at my time of 9:30, which will be 12:30 your time. So you've got Patty, Catherine and Mike Hawken. Welcome, Mike.
Cool. So we've got the audit update now from Mike. Obviously the audit's just been delayed a couple of months through the LTP adoption, but I'll hand over to Mike now to take us through his audit report.
Thanks, Patty. And I'll take our report as read and just begin by thanking Catherine and the team for their support through the audit process. I think there was probably fair to say a little bit of audit fatigue, given that we went straight from LTP into the annual report this year. But notwithstanding that, we had a good level of support and engagement throughout the annual report process. So I can confirm at the time of writing, we did have a few things we were still finishing off. We have finished those. So we're now in a position where our work is complete. In terms of pertinent matters related to the audit, we make a couple of observations just around the valuations, and I think probably just appropriate to pick up on Tony's point from earlier on about the underground assets, you know, they are evaluated as part of the valuation as well. And I guess what is of interest perhaps to the committee is that because of the, I guess, the relative newness of the Queenstown infrastructure, the valuer provides a grading of those underground assets and how easily they're able to assess them. And so they get typically a B, C grading from the valuer, which is actually relative to most councils is actually a good level of understanding of that underground infrastructure. So I just thought that might be relevant given some of the previous discussion as well. We did identify, you know, an adjustment in relation to vested assets during the year. You will notice that there was a significant amount of vested assets. It is a bit lumpy, vested assets, depending on the level of, you know, development activity that's occurring in the region. That was picked up, followed through with management and an adjustment made. We did then do some additional testing to make sure that we didn't have other issues within vested assets that we needed to be aware of, but we were able to isolate that to a particular issue which has been corrected. There's a couple of other matters. We spent a bit of time this year looking at the GHG reporting. You know, that is going to be a more, I think, significant area of focus going forward. And Queenstown in particular is probably one of the first councils to report GHG emissions. You know, certainly outside of Auckland and some of the major urban councils. So we worked with management to work through. That is a measure that's contained within your statement of service performance. So we worked through and did some work with them using our climate specialists as part of that work. So that was good to get that kicked off and establish some precedent going forward. I would just remind the committee that consistent with last year, there is guidance from the OAG that we are required to include in our audit report an emphasis of matter related to GHG emission reporting. And because Queenstown reports greenhouse gas emissions, we then need to include an emphasis of matter in our audit. I just want to make clear that the inclusion of that paragraph in the audit report does not in any way suggest a modification of the opinion. It is still a clean opinion. It's just bringing attention to that particular matter given the topical nature of GHG reporting. Perhaps there are obviously some other matters. I'm conscious of time, Stuart, so perhaps at that point I can pause and offer the opportunity for questions from the committee.
Thank you, Mike. Open it up for questions. Heath?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just quick one, do you guys through the audit testing now have to get those valuations, those independent valuations peer reviewed? Are you guys doing that?
No. No, we do a process where if we've got particular sort of subject matter complexity within a valuation, we might get them peer reviewed, but we don't undertake a peer review. We do use our corporate finance specialists within our firm, where there are sort of valuation issues. For example, you know, we might use the valuation team to advise us on discount rates used in a investment property valuation to make sure they're reasonable. But all of that work is done internally by Deloitte as the appointed auditor.
Any else?
Very, very high level. It's just around the recommendations that you've made. Maybe it's my, how are we checking, I guess, to see that they get covered off? And I guess including any that are raised to the management leader, which we don't get to see. So is there some sort of system whereby we can sort of create a list of the issues raised in the audit report and just have an explanation from the leadership team as to how these have been dealt with? Because I note there is one in there that says, consistent with previous periods, we noticed 2 areas where controls are not considered best practice, no formal review for journal entries, and something about journal posting, and Tech 1 being granted to a wide group of employees. That was the same as the year before. So is there something we can do in this committee forum, or does it sit somewhere else where we can have a tick of the issues raised, and maybe you could list the ones, any that come up in the management letter as well?
Well, the main ones are here, and they sit with Catherine to basically implement. We're happy to provide some commentary back later in the year about how we address those.
That would be great.
And just to give you some assurance around the management letter, so anything that is, we think, significant, relevant for the, benefit of the committee, we would bring to the committee through this report. Those items in the management letter are really administrative issues that we think are appropriately dealt with at a management level. So hence the reporting there.
Thank you.
Any further questions? If not, I'll move the noting of the contents of the report. Got a seconder?
I'll second.
Thank you, Lyle. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Carried. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. Right, I'll move that the public be excluded from the meeting. For the public excluded part of it. I've got a seconder. Keith is yawning. Oh.
He sort of had his hand up.
He had his hand up. All those in favour? Aye, carried.